It was a morning like any other in Bikini Bottom. The sun peeked through the water's surface, casting its familiar warm glow over the ocean town. Jellyfish buzzed lazily, sea snails meowed in the distance, and Squidward tentacles hit the snooze button on his alarm clock with a groggy groan. But something felt off. He shuffled to his bathroom mirror, straightened his bathrobe, and blinked. "Looking good," he muttered, nodding at his reflection. As he stepped outside to get the morning paper, a banner hanging across the street caught his eye. Bikini Bottom celebrates Squidward Tentacles Day. He squinted. What in Neptune's name? Across the street, SpongeBob stood in his yard, but instead of the usual enthusiastic wave and screechy, "Good morning, Squidward," he gave a quiet nod and returned to watering a plant. As Squidward walked to the Krusty Krab, he noticed more changes. A massive billboard read, "Try our famous Squid Burger," created by Bikini Bottom's own genius, Squidward Tentacles. Inside, Mr. Krabs wore a custom apron with Squidward's face on it, while customers chattered excitedly about his latest clarinet single playing over the restaurant speakers. "Squidward," shouted a fish from across the room, "can I get your autograph?" Squidward blinked, frozen. The world had changed, and he was the star of the show. To understand how Squidward Tentacles became the center of Bikini Bottom, we need to rewind a bit. It all started one quiet afternoon at the Krusty Krab. Business was slow, Mr. Krabs was counting pennies in his office, and SpongeBob was humming while mopping the floor. Squidward, annoyed as always, sat behind the register sketching yet another abstract self-portrait on a napkin. "These people wouldn't know real talent if it slapped them with a jellyfish," he muttered. Suddenly, a fancy food critic walked through the doors. A tall, elegant anglerfish with a notepad in hand. Mr. Krabs jumped to attention. "SpongeBob, quick, cook something fancy." But SpongeBob had just slipped on his soapy mop water and knocked himself out cold. Mr. Krabs turned, panicked. "Squidward, you've seen SpongeBob cook a million times. Do something." For once, Squidward didn't complain. He saw an opportunity. He rushed into the kitchen, took a deep breath, and tried to remember everything he'd mocked SpongeBob for doing. The result? A weird but oddly delicious dish. The Squid Burger, grilled kelp, coral cheese, a dab of peanut butter, all topped with a miniature clarinet-shaped pickle. The critic took a bite and gasped. "This is inspired, daring, a true expression of emotion," he declared. The next day, food blogs, ocean-wide broadcasts, and even Poseidon's Palace in Atlantis were raving about Squidward's culinary genius. Mr. Krabs, seeing dollar signs, renamed the Krusty Krab's signature item and plastered Squidward's face on every ad. But it didn't stop there. That same week, Squidward's latest clarinet solo, Lonely Reef at Midnight, went viral after a local radio station played it during a commercial. Soon, he was performing at Goo Lagoon's Summer Jazz Fest, leading art classes at the Rec Center, and being interviewed on Good Morning Bikini Bottom. For the first time, people weren't laughing at Squidward, they were applauding. At first, he loved it. Fame, fans, fortune, it was everything he ever wanted. Everyone respected him. Everyone finally saw his greatness. But as the days passed, Squidward didn't notice that things were slowly shifting around him, and not necessarily for the better. While Squidward's face appeared on billboards and his music played across Bikini Bottom, SpongeBob's world quietly faded into the background. He still lived in his pineapple, still wore his square pants, and still showed up to work on time with a smile. But now, instead of flipping Krabby Patties with joy, he swept the floors while Squidward soaked up the spotlight. The Krusty Krab's new decor featured Squidward-themed booths, a statue by the counter, and a looping video of his clarinet performances on a mounted jelly screen TV. SpongeBob? He wasn't even listed as an employee of the month anymore. That wall, too, was now a shrine to Squidward. "Morning, Squidward," SpongeBob would say every day, same as always, but instead of the usual enthusiastic response, or even the usual groan, Squidward was too busy signing autographs or giving interviews. SpongeBob didn't seem upset, not really. If anything, he was supportive, proud even. He kept cheering Squidward on from the sidelines. He attended Squidward's art shows, laughed at his not-so-funny jokes, and clapped the loudest during his concerts. But something was different in SpongeBob's eyes. A quiet loneliness, maybe, or just confusion that the world had changed and left him behind. Patrick noticed too. "Why don't you say something?" he asked one day, munching on a kelp chip. "I don't need to be the main character," SpongeBob replied with a smile, "as long as my friends are happy." It was sincere, but underneath that optimism was a little echo of sadness, the kind that only comes when your world tilts ever so slightly out of place. Still, SpongeBob didn't push back. He adapted. He became a side character in his own story, and he never stopped being there for Squidward, even when Squidward was too busy to notice. With Squidward now the center of attention in Bikini Bottom, everything shifted, and not just the signs or menus or playlists. People themselves began to change. Patrick Star, SpongeBob's former sidekick in silliness, reinvented himself as Squidward's unofficial manager, assistant, and fan club president. He followed Squidward everywhere, carrying around a foam finger that read #1 Squid, and a notebook where he jotted down Squidward's every word, convinced they were poetic masterpieces. When Squidward sneezed at a press event, Patrick insisted on bottling the air as a souvenir. "Can I be your muse?" Patrick asked one day, wrapped in toilet paper and posing dramatically on Squidward's front lawn. "No," Squidward muttered, stepping over him, but Patrick didn't mind. He was just honored to be ignored by a legend. Sandy Cheeks, the brains of Bikini Bottom, saw potential in Squidward's fame as a vehicle for innovation. She started designing clarinet-shaped gadgets, like the Aroma Reed 3000, which played music while releasing calming choral scents. She offered to design Squidward a new lab studio hybrid complete with underwater acoustics and a soundproof meditation booth where he could practice without interruption. Squidward was skeptical, but flattered. "Just don't make it too flashy," he warned. Sandy, of course, made it launchable into orbit. Mr. Krabs took it to another level. Every inch of the Krusty Krab was now commercialized. He sold Squidward keychains, Squidward-themed sauces, Squidward sleep masks, even a musical toilet seat that played his clarinet solo when you sat down. He didn't care much about Squidward's actual music or art. What mattered was the profit, and as long as the customers kept buying, he kept expanding. Even Plankton couldn't resist. Tired of chasing the Krabby Patty formula, he now wanted what Squidward had: fame. He opened the Chum Tentacle, a knockoff version of the Krusty Krab with robotic Squidward impersonators, which malfunctioned constantly but drew curious crowds. "This is branding genius," he cackled, while a robot Squidward exploded behind him. Squilliam Fancyson, Squidward's longtime nemesis, once mocked Squidward at every opportunity, but now he called Squidward for advice on music scores. He even invited him to co-host the prestigious Choral Culture Gala. Squidward tried to remain humble, but he could barely hide the smugness. Yet as everyone focused on Squidward, chasing his approval, emulating his style, cashing in on his brand, they started to lose their own voices. SpongeBob, once the glue of Bikini Bottom's community, was barely acknowledged. Laughter was rarer. Jellyfishing outings became Squidward signing events. Even Sandy's inventions felt less about discovery, more about decor. Bikini Bottom wasn't really Bikini Bottom anymore. It was Squidwardville, and no one noticed the weird emptiness growing beneath the surface. At first, Squidward couldn't get enough of it. The attention, the praise, the silence of respect replacing the chaos of SpongeBob's laughter. For once in his life, he wasn't just tolerated, he was adored, admired, worshipped. Every fish in town wore his merch, every news outlet quoted his one-liners, and every concert was sold out weeks in advance. But it didn't take long before the cracks began to show. It started with the calendar. Squidward's schedule was packed. Mornings were for clarinet recordings. Afternoons included ribbon cuttings, book signings, and Squidburger taste test events. Evenings meant rehearsals, interviews, and sometimes live debates about abstract art on the Bikini Bottom Brainwaves talk show. There was no time for painting, no time for solitude, no time for Squidward. Everywhere he went, someone needed something. Sandy needed another clarinet sound for her new invention. Patrick wanted to launch a spin-off fan club in Rock Bottom. Mr. Krabs wanted Squidward to endorse a line of tentacle wax. Even Plankton begged to license his name for a cologne called Essence of Tentacles. He tried to smile through it, but every "congratulations" felt heavier. Every "you've changed my life" made him feel like he'd lost his own. One night he finally snapped. It was during the biggest concert of his career, the Coral Coliseum. Over 10,000 sea creatures gathered to hear Squidward play. Cameras rolled. Reporters whispered about him being the next Mozart of the sea. The stage lights hid his face. The microphone popped on. He raised his clarinet, and nothing came out. Not a note, not a squeak. The crowd leaned in. Squidward lowered his instrument, sweat beading down his forehead. I don't want to play," he mumbled. There was a stunned silence. I don't want to be amazing today, or tomorrow, or the next day. I just want to eat a plain seaweed sandwich in peace, and maybe paint a picture of a lonely coral tree without someone asking if it's inspired by societal chaos. I don't want to be your hero, I just want to be Squidward. Then he dropped the clarinet, walked off stage, and disappeared into the sea. Bikini Bottom was stunned. The headlines called it a breakdown. Mr. Krabs called it a marketing disaster. Patrick cried into his foam finger. Sandy started building a mental wellness dome. But none of them really understood what Squidward had finally realized. Fame had taken the one thing he valued most, his peace, and replaced it with a version of himself he didn't recognize. Squidward didn't go far, just far enough. He wandered through jellyfish fields, past the usual buzzing and bouncing of the jellyfish, but this time, no one followed him with a camera, no eager fans, no Patrick, no SpongeBob, just soft breezes and the gentle hum of underwater life. He found a quiet rock and sat down. For hours. No clarinet, no lights, no noise. Just him, the soft rustling of kelp, and the faint smell of sea daisies. At first it felt like freedom. Then came the wave of exhaustion, the kind that doesn't come from physical tiredness, but from pretending too long. He lay down in the sand, eyes open to the dim shimmer above, and let it all crash over him. He wasn't sad, he wasn't angry, he was just empty. Meanwhile, back in town, Bikini Bottom was spinning into chaos. The Krusty Krab's customers stormed out when their squid burgers were replaced by generic patties. Mr. Krabs frantically tried to film Squidward lookalikes for new commercials, but none could match the real thing. Patrick tried giving motivational speeches in Squidward's voice. It was disturbing. Sandy built a squid drone to search the fields, but it got stuck in a kelp bed and started broadcasting random clarinet loops on repeat. Even Plankton tried to claim Squidward had retired to the chum bucket, offering merch and selfies with a Squidward mannequin. But none of it worked. People began to notice what was missing, not just Squidward's face, but what his presence had quietly brought, a kind of balance. Ironically, Squidward's annoyed groans and sarcastic comments had become part of the town's heartbeat. Without him, Bikini Bottom felt like a party with no music, a joke with no punchline. That's when SpongeBob decided to do something. He didn't ask for help, he didn't form a search party. He just packed a jellyfish net, a peanut butter sandwich, and set out for Jellyfish Fields. He found Squidward right before sunset, still sitting under the same rock. "Hey Squidward." Silence. "I brought snacks." More silence. "I miss you," SpongeBob finally said, his voice quieter now. "Not the famous version, just you, the guy who hates everything I do but still shows up. The guy who complains all day but deep down kinda keeps us all grounded." Squidward didn't respond, but he didn't tell him to leave either. SpongeBob sat beside him. They watched the jellyfish dance in the fading light. No talking, no clarinets, just quiet. And in that moment, Squidward realized something. Being the main character isn't about being the most visible, the most praised, or the most powerful. It's about having people who notice when you're gone, people who care. The next morning, Squidward returned to Bikini Bottom, not with a parade or an announcement, but with a slow, unbothered walk down Conch Street. He carried no luggage, wore no special outfit, just his old bathrobe and a look of quiet peace. As he passed by SpongeBob's pineapple, his neighbor rushed outside with a big smile and open arms. "I knew you'd come back!" "Don't make this weird," Squidward muttered, but with the faintest twitch of a smile. Life didn't go back to exactly how it was before. It was better, balanced. Squidward didn't perform at stadiums anymore. He played small sets at the Reefside Cafe on Friday nights, where no one asked for selfies and the applause was polite, not deafening. He picked up painting again, creating bold abstract murals on the sides of buildings, not for fame, but because it made him happy. The Krusty Krab removed the Squidward shrine and brought back the regular menu. Mr. Krabs, ever the businessman, tried to pitch a new item, the Sponge Patty, but it flopped horribly. SpongeBob, once again on grill duty, couldn't have been happier. Sandy returned to inventing for science's sake. Patrick went back to stargazing on his rock, occasionally dropping by Squidward's house to offer wisdom, which usually amounted to sharing half a cookie and falling asleep mid-sentence. Squidward still grumbled, still frowned at SpongeBob's antics, and still sighed heavily every morning. But now it wasn't bitterness. It was routine, familiar, comfortable, and sometimes when no one was looking, he'd play his clarinet by the window, not to impress anyone, not for a concert, just for himself, and maybe a little for his oddball neighbors too. Because in the end, Squidward had learned something unexpected. Being the main character wasn't about the spotlight, it was about having a role that mattered, even if it wasn't always center stage. And in Bikini Bottom, everyone, especially a grumpy, misunderstood artist with a big nose and a bigger heart, had their own part to play. If you enjoyed this expanded look at what if Squidward was the main character, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more what if scenarios. Let us know what other SpongeBob questions you'd like us to explore next.